harder to do.
Yeah, and I do wonder if I feel like I have to nuance that so that we're not like sort of silly. Like the Buddhist guy that came in January, he talked about the difference between pain and suffering, and how pain is like very natural. It's a signal to your brain, things are not the way I want. And suffering is like when we just chew on it over and over and over and over again. And I wonder if that's more of the ilk, yeah. Because I meet people sometimes that are like what I would call overly optimistic, and I'm glad it works for them. But to say like, well, wrecked my car today, but everything's good, it's like, wow, that's unapproachable. I mean, I'm glad you're there. I'm usually like, you're not there, you're lying, like I just overly optimistic people, they're just tough, right, for me.
But good for them.
Good for them, and I'm glad it works, but I don't think that we're being invited to be people we're not. Some people are that way, good for them. I'm not. And I don't think God needs me to change that, if that makes sense.
Don't change who you are.
Yeah, and I do think there's quite a bit to be said, though, like what they try to teach you in pastoral care classes, I'm realizing now, is like, hey, when you can be with somebody in pain, and when you start suffering from their pain, you're not serving them.
Right.
So it has to be a way that you can be with their pain and not take on their suffering, because then there's just more suffering. There's theirs, and then now you've got it too, like, and the world didn't get better.
And there are levels of compassion. For me, being with someone who's suffering, I feel their pain. I do feel it emotionally and physically. I mean, sometimes in my body I feel it. But then I have to have a certain amount of distance in order to not go into them and go into their pain.
Yeah.
I have to have enough distance to be able to think clearly and be who I am and still feel their pain somewhat.
And
then let
go.
Yes. And then let go of it. Like, by let go of it, I mean set it aside.
Mm-hmm.
It's still there, but for the moment I have to go on with life.
Sure.
Yeah, but my Rebecca, when she was in law school, went to a legal clinic that was helping kids in foster care who were in the juvenile justice system, right? And after about 2 weeks of that, she said, I can't do this anymore, because I'm bringing it home to our kid who came from the foster care. And I'm starting to like think he's going to have these challenges, and I can't be with him and my worry about the challenges at the same time. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Some people can do this. Some people think they can do it and they're wrong. That's usually me. But I think it's a good point.
One of the things about Jesus being sin in the cross, Adam and Eve opened the door to all the weaknesses and things that eventually evolved from all of that. And Jesus came to show us how to close that door. And it was sin that crucified Jesus. Maybe, I don't know, but that seems to make more sense to me, because it was the sin of those in authority that crucified Jesus. And so Jesus died because of their sin. But his life on earth, he was showing us how to get into life God's way.
So I think the book asks this question, and this is like without any judgment. What do we need saving from? And maybe I don't want you to go into your head and your tradition. I want to ask you, what do you need salvation from today? Is that okay? Just to ask that?
Me.
I guess you look, well, it depends on the individual. But, your weaknesses, things that you would like to do differently, responsive, depending on the circumstances.
Patterns of behavior.
Absolutely.
Impatient,
Mm.
Patience,
impatience.
versus impatience, doubts,
Doubts.
sure, all of it. And each individual's gonna have more of one than the other, probably. I know, but I think.
You know, it's, when you ask that question, what do we need saving from?
Mhm.
I'm thinking to myself, what do I need saving from? And I'm thinking, maybe it's not what I need to be saving from. Maybe it's how I need to learn to work to live in a community. Maybe that's what Jesus was trying to teach us.
We can't hear him down here.
She couldn't hear you.
Oh,
They have
Well,
a
but-
hearing aid on.
what I was saying is perhaps we don't need to be saved from something. Maybe we need to learn how to live in community.
So save us from our tendency to isolate, our tendency to be center focused on us.
Well, no, not necessarily isolation, but how to be a member of a faith community.
Okay,
You know, not to be saved from, I don't know, being angry about something. Just how do I handle that anger when I'm in community?
So instead of, for maybe one way you're saying this, instead of the question, what do I need saving from having traction? It is like, what does a salvific life look like?
Yeah.
And it's one that's in community is what I hear you saying.
that goes back to what the speaker said, that Jesus created a new community. He saves the community from, it gives the community a new hope. It's a new type. So he was talking about saving the world by creating a new community, which I guess he think is the church. The fellowship.
And I feel that when I'm having difficulties and, maybe being depressed about something or other, I know that I have a community to go to help me through those times, who saved me. My community saves me. I like that because, I can call someone up and say, this is how I'm feeling right now. And I've got friends that it isn't that they don't want to fix me. Okay, but they want to listen and hear me and be there as I work to overcome the difficulties I'm having. But what I just can't imagine living without my community.
I actually really appreciate the non-theological language you just used. I really appreciate it because sometimes I think we give like sanctimonious replies to this question. And I really appreciate people are being like, hey, these are the concrete things. And what's interesting about what you said, right, is I've got a good friend who's an alcoholic, right? And step one is that you turn your life over to a higher power of your own understanding, whether that's Allah or Vishnu or like Jesus, right?
Right.
And it's so interesting because like this is part of like religious training that sort of says, oh, like that's too pedestrian language. Like, where's the high theological language? Like, we do this because of God. But like what I just really heard you say, right, is that like God is embodied in community. And that's why I need it.
Yes.
Because when the community comes together rightly, that's God. Not just there, over and above, but like that's this natural expression of God where people find salvation. I think that's what I heard you
Yeah,
say.
absolutely.
And I'm using the theological language that I'm glad you didn't use.
Because it's the God within the community that is helping me personally.
And then this comes this really interesting append, because he said this thing about the first guy, the introductor, that there's a personal victory that conquers evil. And I'm not sure that's like it. I just read this book I mentioned Sunday, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It's a tough book to read. So what salvation did the Cheyenne need? They didn't need comfort in their heart. I mean, they did, but what they really needed was miners to stop encroaching on their agreed upon lands and stealing their people and raping their wives and killing their children. That's what they needed. And I'm sure there were a lot of miners who were very assured of their salvation religiously, who missed it every day they did that. I don't know if that makes sense, right? And that's not my life, but because I read that book and because we read this one, like, hey, salvation in the Hebrew Bible is really about structures of power and deliverance from political entities of oppression, right? We read that and we've turned it, I think we get it's not only that, but sometimes we forget it is also that. You can't have a community when you don't honor a treaty, right? Like,
Yeah.
so there's the personal part, but then there's the corporate part. And sometimes I think we forget to hold them both. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So like, what does salvation look like if you live in Tijuana? Well, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. And we have to handle like, what's immigration look like nationally, and like, how do we be in community with people on the other side of the border, even if we choose not to let them across the border? I mean, I think those are important questions. Not that we should have no borders. How do we have community with borders? And if we can't, we got to figure something else out, right? I mean, because sometimes I think we make salvation too small. We make it too personal, and we get these really, I think, helpful reminders in the Hebrew Bible, like this is corporate. This is about community. And part of what I hear in Jesus Savior, right, is who's in the community?
I'm not sure this tags on what you're saying, but I think I was just, when you said about the community, the people coming that are in Mexico, we have almost every worker that comes to our house is from Mexico, and they always, but once they get to know us, they will share their lives, or it's where they come from, or what they've left behind, and that is, I don't think my house or our yard or what happens to our roof and all that is unique to the rest of the community in this area. And but they, you see the work they do and the commitment they make, and I'll just describe, we had a roofer that came in and what was he putting 100 pounds on his, he was on a ladder, and he would put 100 pounds of, what was he putting on his back? Honey, no, it was going up the ladder to roofing materials to take it up to the roof, to the people that were working on it. Well, I watched him from the kitchen window, and that was just, it was painful to watch him because you knew he had a lot of weight on him. Yet he did it. And when he got to the top, there were a couple of other men who pulled the weights off. And then he went down again and did it again. And I didn't talk to him or to get to know him in any way, but based on all the stories that they've told us, I'm sure that his wasn't very different. And I'm not sure we're going over with the ties of what you're saying, but these are people, these are God's people. I don't know. I'm not sure, Mike, how I'm trying.
Well, what I'm hearing you say, right, like coming on to community again is like community for who? A small group of people who we've all agreed on the same things, or like, hey, what about people who speak a different language? And I see these people who like speak differently, come from a different country, upholding the community I live in, right? They're like repairing my roof. They're working really, really hard. So,
And they're humans like us.
and they're
we
humans.
have- And what I heard too was compassion
Yeah.
for a
Yes.
human being. Regardless of the trappings, the skin color or the language.
I mean, I think the follow-up to the Native American bit, right, is like, again, who's in the community of God? And what I see Jesus pushing is who isn't in the community of God, who is not. And you say like, look, here's somebody that we hire, right, who works really hard for us. And a lot of times it's easy to treat these people like hired help instead of saying, salvation is when I live in community with you.
And we put some barriers around us so that, you know, we don't interact with other communities. And that's the thing that needs to be broken down.
I was watching on television the lighting of the Capitol Christmas tree. And one of the people who spoke was a park ranger who was a Native American. And she talked about, you know, preserving the land through our park system. And that, you know, her community, the people she came from, her background, her heritage, you know, that was paramount for them.
Mhm.
Was taking care of the land and preserving it. And she felt a part of the American community through the work that she was doing as a park ranger. And because she said, I'm able to bring my heritage to people that I talk to in the parks and let them know that we came to this late. Because my people were doing it centuries before, but we're doing it together now. And I just thought that was very special, that she was able to express that. That she felt a part of the American community. Because so often, you know, the way we have treated Native Americans in the past, I would understand if they didn't feel part of our community.
Mhm.
They kept the treaties, the white men did not.
Now, don't let me that distract from the table, question on the table. What do you need to save? What do you need saving from?
I think separation from God, both now and after death. And it's reassuring to know that in spite of our sin, we can have a relationship with God.
I think that my relationship with God, and I don't know about it, is through the people I know. I mean, which is, that's not anything visible, but my relationship with him, my daughters, my grandchildren, and you guys, when we come in here even for a short period of time and we don't really know you, but yet we know your faces and people share their feelings, and we're totally comfortable about walking out of here and not worrying that anybody's gonna go, God, they're gonna talk about what I said or what, you know, it's silly. Anyway, that's part of the way I feel that we share through God. That's how I do it.
I'm right now. I'm thinking of in the past when I don't feel a need to be saved right now. I'm feeling like I'm in a good spot at this moment. But there have been times when I felt very separate from God. And I realized that one particular moment, it was my anger towards someone else
Mm.
who had hurt me tremendously, a huge betrayal. And I would go to church, St. Christopher's over here,
Mm.
and I could not feel God. I could not connect with God. And I know it was my anger. It was my anger. And so I began, and I didn't want to let go of that anger because I wanted to punish that person. But actually, that person could have cared less. That person would just keep on doing what he did. I mean, to other people as well as me. And so I realized it's just hurting me,
Eating you up.
eating me up. And so my prayer was constantly, God, make me willing to let go of my anger. Just the willingness. That was the first step. And eventually I began to think, well, okay. And it took a long time, but God did answer my prayer and I was able to let go of that anger. And the morning it happened in church, it was just like, I'm home. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And it's so I need saving from my own emotions, which block me from God's presence.
That's why I say I
That's
need
pretty
saving
normal.
from
I
peace.
think we all do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you said, Herb, and I think like from when I hear
Sorry, I had a little theological.
No, I appreciate it actually. I appreciate it because actually, like, if I'm honest, I kind of take what you said for granted. Like,
Oh, yeah.
that's like not a thing I worry about much. And in that sense, like I got a strong sense of agreement with you. The things that like, if I either like, and this is a weird thing, like this is like personal savior material, right? Like, boy, like there are patterns of behavior that like I don't even like. And I could continue to do them. And so I would love to have some salvation from that. Although I don't think that Jesus just does that for me. I didn't think so, right? And that's the interesting bit about salvation, maybe not being in a moment, but being like the start of a journey.
Yeah.
I sure would like some paved roads. That would that'd be nice, you know. As I mentioned Sunday, again, I take for granted that God's got me when I die, but you know, like I do often find myself like not present, where throughout the day, like not present. And it's super weird, you know, like I don't know if I'm just telling my own story here, but there's times where I really want to do stuff with my daughter, and then she'll say, like, let's do this thing. And I'm like, oh, do that. You know, like because the timing or like there's the pattern of that interaction and I'm like, oh, it's going to be a lot of work. I was like, why couldn't we do this thing that I wanted to do, you know? And later I'm like, look, your first goal was to have time with your kid. She told you what she wanted to do. So why are you like about it, you know? And like, I find myself with these things all the time. Like they get in the way from me being present, even though that's like what I think I want to do. So sorting that out, that'd be really salvific for me. Now, again, I didn't think Jesus shows up with a wand and says like, abracadabra, you know, like, but I do see that the guy was present with like people I'd probably judge as not being real good either, right? I mean, that's what all his friends said, like, you're spending time with losers. Like, and I'm guessing Jesus didn't say, you know, you're such a loser, I'm going to come save you. I don't find that very salvific. Instead, I imagine Jesus saying like, you don't seem to really be enjoying your life or yourself. I can enjoy you. I don't know. That gives me a lot of consolation. You know, I used to think Jesus spent time with tax collectors and prostitutes and a duty. He didn't like them, and he was investing in them to like fix them. But then it made me wonder, what if he actually liked spending time with those people?
And
Or-
I feel that my image is that he was present with them. He he listened to them. Who was talking about listening? There was, he was their community. He was their person who saw them, who heard them, and that allows them then to work on themselves. Like I was asking for, make me willing to work on myself. So I think we have the capacity to heal ourselves with God's help.
Yeah.
Because he hears me, he knows me.
Like in the baptismal covenant, you know, when we answer, I will with God's help. You know, when we're
okay.
asked
There's
those
the theology,
questions.
yeah.
You know, we're doing the theology.
Yeah.
I'm grateful. What I meant to say is sometimes we over jargonize things so they're not even real. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I appreciate, this is not a group that, you know, pontificates jargonically. And I'm just saying I appreciate that. That's it. So there's no ban on theo speak. I just know, like in my own life, theo speak is actually a way of escaping reality instead of like being present in it.
Sometimes when I watch him talk or them talk, it's so much jargon. I just kind of
Yeah,
shut down. It's like,
I'm thinking, what are you telling me?
uh-huh.
Give me the 1, 2, 3, because
Yeah. I mean,
that was with me today. You know?
I understand it, but it's kind of
Yeah.
boring. It's
Yeah.
just like, come on,
Yeah.
get on with it.
And there's even loaded up words like redemption, right? And redemption, I mean, I know how to use the word in a sentence and I know how it gets used in church, but like, what does it really mean? You know, like, what does it really mean? And he is that redemption save us from our mortality. I hate to tell you this, folks, God's not interested in saving you from your mortality. God made it. This is like a strange thing that somehow it entered the church like death is a bad thing. It's really good. Death is a really good thing. We were created to die. Like this is going to happen to us. God's not worried about that. The scriptures are worried about death with the capital D, which is a state of living, not our body dying. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've decided that life at all costs must be preserved, which is nonsense,
Right.
I think. Sorry.
How did death become sin?
Well, I don't know, Tim. And if you read Martin Heidegger, do you know this guy?
Yes.
Martin Heidegger, German philosopher, Jewish. He basically said a lot of religion's just escapism. People are like afraid to die. And so since they're afraid of that, they spend all their time thinking about what'll happen next instead of confronting the fact, I'm not going to live forever. And I read this really interesting theory the other day from this guy, Brian Greene, who said there's these people who are not religious and yet they have this like very strong religious drive to do something that will outlast them. And mathematicians do this all the time. They want to create a theorem or a law or a proof because that'll live forever, which is another way of escapism. This building is going to fall down. You know, like I'm reminded it's nice and it'll last for a while, but it's still temporal. I do say in church, you know, like there's things we do that outlive us. And I believe that. And yet also that memory is going to come to an end too. So this is what we get. We get this. We're going to die. God got this. God died. None of this is a threat to God. But there is this capital D death that has, I think, a lot to do with anxiety and fear and isolation, with broken community, with broken promises, right? This is the kind of stuff that represents death with a capital D, I think. When I hear words like redemption, I think about what we talked about at the beginning that Valerie said, you know, like forgiveness. I have redeemed a thing when I'm grateful for who I am, regardless of the thing, or even because of the thing. I could say it a different way. This should have been a couple of phrases. I told you this like 5 years ago. I had this school parent excoriate me for 40 minutes over the phone. And part of the excoriation that I was not only a bad priest, but a bad human being because I had ink on my arm. And ink, like I have this stuff. And I mentioned this not from a sore point. I mean, I I just mentioned it in passing, and somebody came by in the little line and they said, you know, I don't care that you have those tattoos at all. And I thought, that's nice. And then the next person in line said, I'm glad you have them because they mean something to you. And I thought maybe that's part of the process. I don't see that thing that happened anymore. I'm not looking at it, doesn't affect my relationship with you. I see it. And I'm glad because it made you who you are. That sounds like redemption to me, right? This bad thing happened, it was bad, and it made you who you are, and I wouldn't change who you are a bit. That sounds redemptive in common parlance.
I have a question. I had a friend many years ago who was on her deathbed. And another friend felt that she was not right with God. And was very concerned and very worried that she was going, that my friend that was going to die was going to die without having asked God for forgiveness
Mhm.
for her life,
Mhm.
and that it would affect her life after. And I think I've come to realize with this class that God doesn't love us anymore or any less. He loves us as who we are. And yes, I would wish that she and various things had caused her to feel this way and kind of deny God. God had made these things happen to her in her life. And that's why she, wasn't gonna, she didn't want last rites. She didn't want anybody of a religious nature to be around her. But that she would be okay. God loved her, whether she loved God or not.
And that's a comfort to those of you who are left.
Yes,
Because
I
you-
did.
you
I
know
didn't
that.
feel that at the time,
Yeah.
but I didn't feel the way my other friend felt either. But I've come to realize that, and that's a great comfort.
Yeah.
I have a horror story. It was horror to me to hear and know this was happening. I was leading a small group several years ago, and there was a couple, and the woman had a brother, and their dad was dying. He was terminally ill, and they were both, the brother and the woman, were just panicky that he was going to die without being saved. And they would go to his bedside and berate him and pound on him and preach to him. And I just wanted to say, stop it. I mean, I can't think of anything worse to do to someone who is terminally ill. To me, that's horrific.
Is trying to convert them for the sake of our own fears.
Yes,
Than for their own,
yes.
for theirs.
Yeah.
My dad said this phrase, and this word showed up last week. The word dogma showed up, right, when we were talking about this class. And my dad had this very famous phrase that he used very dismissively. I don't think he knew, but there was some insight into it, that a lot of times our dogma is bigger than our God.
Yes.
And if I'm honest about what I need salvation from, it's probably that. From my dogma, which is inevitably smaller than God. Yeah.
I had a minister tell me when my sister was dying of cancer. And she said she hated God because her husband had died and she loved him very much. And he said something very telling to me. He said, your sister doesn't hate God or doesn't not believe in God because you can't hate something that you don't believe in.
Yeah, you maybe you've heard this famous story, this chaplain at Harvard. People would come in and say like, I don't believe in God. And the reply was always, well, tell me which God you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in that one either. And usually when I find myself hating God, what I'm hating is my ideas about what God's supposed to do. And it's interesting, God doesn't seem to be too worried about projection or transference from me. Like, God, I expect you to do this. God doesn't really seem to care about my expectations. I hope this is okay to say. And this is psychologically very helpful. It's called differentiation, right? I can tell you it happens a lot by me. It happens sometimes to me. You know, I wear one of these little white things, which is like a really great screen that people can project all of their expectations on, right? It's like, you didn't do this thing and you're supposed to do this and that, right? And to be honest, I do that to folks all the other time. I mean, I do. And that's called transference. I have an expectation, you're not meeting it, therefore you're bad. Instead of, oh, like you are not my expectation, like you are something else. I have a hard time differentiating myself sometimes. I mentioned it Sunday. My daughter uses a tone. I'm like, oh my God, she hates me. Instead of like, oh, she's just like really cranky and she's 10, you know, like she's 10 and hungry. And I was talking to this spiritual director friend of mine right after a sabbatical. And I was like, you know, sometimes I know what my job is, and it's not always the same as like my vocation and my call. And he was like, good for you. You realize there's more to yourself than your job. I would like more of that salvation, because I often conflate these bits, right? Or conflate God's favor with me or somebody else based on their apparent spiritual disciplines or their prayer life, you know. And I don't want to be overly romantic, but like, I'm not convinced that many of the Cheyenne needed much conversion. I think they were just fine. You know, I think they were just fine. And this is where we can get our own anxiety about salvation and hell. We've got to convert them at all costs, even if it means killing them. But that's part of our history. I mean, really, they were people who really had that. They weren't killing Native Americans to be mean. They just saw that a means to an end of them going to heaven when they died, because they were heathen savages. And sometimes we can sort of say, like, your soul is what matters the most, even if your life is no good. And I think we get that wrong. Anyway.
You know, when I was chaplain, I had a situation one time where I was chaplain with hospice for a number of years. I was called out to this family's house where the mother was dying. And they had 2 children, little girls about, I guess, you know, 8 or 7 or 8, somewhere in there. And the husband was there. And as chaplain, we were trained to go and to listen. In other words, not to push anything, but to go check on the well-being of the person and so on. And if they wanted to talk, fine. If they didn't, that was, you know, we weren't going to push it. But the husband wouldn't even let me go in to see her. And then he said, I don't want you talking to my children. So I said, okay. So anyway, he came, later he said, I've got to go run an errand. And the kids had gone outside and they were playing with their toys under a tree. And so I was thinking, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to go walk around and see if they'll come to me. So anyway, because he was gone, and I knew that was my only chance. So I walked outside and was walking on the sidewalk, and they were under the tree, and they said, can you come here a minute? And I said, and I went over. And so I had to explain to them that their mother was dying, and they knew that, and that it was not her choice, that she was going to leave and wouldn't come back, but it wasn't their mother's choice. That it was really very sad that she had that cancer, and da-da-da-da-da. So anyway, he comes home and he sees me out with the kids, and they run in the house. No, they did. They went into the house before he got back and I was still outside. So anyway, I think, okay, I guess I better leave now because he's in the house, they're in the house and I don't want to interrupt him. So anyway, I was walking along the sidewalk and he came out and he said to me, I want to thank you for talking to my kids. He said, they are totally different now from what they were, what the way they were feeling. And, you know, that's another kind of hurt that is being brought to people. And there was another situation where a young man, his father had died and he was having a hard time. And they wanted the chaplain to come and talk with him. And so I asked him, I said, tell me what you, anyway, what it was I had to address the fact of what he sees on TV about monsters and deaths and cruelty and things of that sort, and what was happening to his dad. Now, was he being taught, you know? And so I said, no, you need to separate the TV from actuality. Your father is with God, things are well. You will see him one day, so that way too. So there's all kinds of hurt out there that people do out of ignorance, and it's sad.
Well, I'm always grateful for your openness, especially today. These were like really lovely stories. Are we okay to meet next week? It's still before Christmas.
Yeah, but it's okay with me. Whatever y'all decide.
I'd like to. I won't, the week after Christmas, I'll need to take off. So
Yeah.
we can do atonement next week, number 14.
Sounds good.
Very light topic before the holidays.
We can